In my social circle, my family and friends, I'm known not to like apologies. I don't mean that I never apologize. I mostly never want an apology. I'm fairly alone in that. I've actually never met anyone who is like that. Today, I will analyze apologies and hope that why I don't like them very much will become apparent. I'm going to be dealing with apologizing as it exists in mainstream English, US, Canada, Britain, and so forth. But keep in mind, hardly anything about this necessarily applies outside that sphere. Whatever other culture that you live in or you're influenced by, they will have, well, could have completely different uses of words that seem to mean something like our apologies. I mean, I can certainly say that German culture, my own culture, has a few nuances regarding apology that differ from the bare bones that I'm using here, but I will leave those out. Now, my background assumption here is the following. We can find out about concepts people have in their heads by looking at how they use expressions relating to that concept, what they say about it, what they try to do with those expressions. And a lot of the time, not all of that, of the concepts that we can ascribe to them based on what they're saying, is something that they're aware of. And I should probably do a video on that basic idea sometime. So, how do we use expressions like to apologize? I think they have many uses, and I'd like to just take them on in no particular order. I'm generating these individual uses analytically. They're basically never as cleanly separated in life. And the typical case is probably that people are trying to do several things at once with an apology. Let's get right into the first use. Think of this common case. Anna has hurt Bob by saying something mean. She was in a bad mood and lashed out at him. She wants to communicate to him that she doesn't stand behind what she did, that she would prefer she hadn't done it, but sort of failed to live up to her own standards, as it happens to all of us in some minor ways, probably all the time. Since she can't influence the past, obviously, she at least wants to sort of limit the damage done. Her message, spelled out, is something like, I know I hurt you, it wasn't a considered act, and I don't stand behind it. Used in this way, an apology is a way to cover for the mishaps of daily interactions. We live in a chaotic world. We're somewhat chaotic beings, and to maintain our relationships with others, we need tools to cover for the minor failures of interaction and self control. And this aspect of apologizing is one of the tools that allow us to do that. A second use of apologies is what we might call acknowledging inconveniences. We often do things that may cause minor trouble to people we're not necessarily close with. Pushing past someone on public transport, interrupting someone to ask for directions, asking a work colleague to repeat an explanation. We might casually apologize in these situations, and the message would be something like, I acknowledge I'm causing a minor inconvenience, but I'm not doing it to cause an inconvenience. An inconvenience, on the other hand, that we feel fully entitled to, we wouldn't need to acknowledge. I think this kind of apology is intended to sort of preserve peace, to make sure everyone feels and is respected, and again cover for the minor friction created by daily interactions. Now we come to something a little more major. We might call it taking responsibility. An apology can be a way to accept responsibility, which is odd because originally the ancient word apologia meant a speech in defense of something or someone. In our usage, a good apology usually at least implies taking responsibility, accepting the judgment that we did something wrong. This aspect of an apology often becomes more important when there's a little more at stake. Maybe we've really hurt someone. Maybe we inadvertently caused trouble to someone. Maybe we made a mistake with larger consequences. The message here would be the fault lies with me. This can be instrumentally useful. If I say screw up at work, admitting the mistake might save everyone further investigation of what went wrong. Responsibility also typically implies that we grant that we at least need to be part of fixing the mistake or damage done by our mistake. But this aspect also has a function related to social peace. Say I inadvertently bump into someone and they fall down. By acknowledging that the fault lies with me, I give them a better chance to understand quickly that they're not being attacked, that they don't need to defend themselves. An attacker, and consequently a defender, doesn't think in terms of fault. Exactly what they wanted to happen did happen. So if I apologize in the responsibility sense, I mark myself as a non aggressor. Additionally, and this is where we start to get into the depths of the concepts surrounding apologies, there seems to be an aspect of justice there. If something unpleasant happens and the person responsible admits fault, we tend to feel milder about what happened. Partly, I believe we think like that because someone who admits fault is more likely to be prepared to help repair the damage. And a lot of the time, that is obviously very helpful. We may also feel that way because we know people make a lot of mistakes. We fail to think things through, and we may even let ourselves slip into genuinely wrong acts. But when we're prepared to accept fault, we have taken a first step to doing better in the future. And since a lot of our social norms are based on the idea that we don't deal with someone just once, a sign that someone might do better in the future is a positive piece of information to have. However, many people feel that way when great damage has been done, maybe even damage that can't be fully undone. Even a murderer's apology can make people feel milder about them. If nothing else, that's interesting. We will put a pin in that for now, but this is a major point we will return to later. Listening to me talk about these aspects of apologies, you might have felt a bit of yes, but. Isn't apologizing just what one does in some situations? Yes, it is, and that idea merits a little attention. In some situations, you're just supposed to apologize. It's what everyone does. It's a social convention everybody is expected to follow, divorced from practical uses it might have or lack. What an apology signals on that level, I'm not so sure. Conformity, certainly. I'm still one of you, would be the message. By apologizing at the appropriate time, you perform your role as a member of polite society. What an apology actually does becomes very vague at that stage, and I think we need to make another pass at it in a little while. We often require children to apologize when they've hurt someone. Go apologize to Tammy. In one way, we can interpret that as training them into the convention. Conventions are often things we don't have to think about because we're so used to them. And to get to that state, you have to practice them, just like you'd practice a technique in sports or music. But imagining the situation where we require one child to apologize to another, we see two more features of an apology. Firstly, there seems to be an element of obligation there. In some situations, one must apologize. It doesn't matter if you feel the need to, it doesn't matter even if the other person feels the need to. It has to be done just because it has to be done. This is another point we'll have to revisit, so bear with me for a little while longer. Secondly, if we let the imagined scene play out, we could imagine a refusal of the apology by little Tammy. We can accept or reject an apology. In many contexts, it's considered bad form to reject an apology, but it does happen. If it is possible to reject an apology, that seems to imply that the act of apology isn't fully complete until it has been accepted. That is, apologizing is a two-sided affair, something we do together. At first glance, that seems to gel well with the aspects of apologies discussed so far. Keeping the peace, ensuring conformity, accommodating human nature are all communal activities. Multi-sidedness seems logical. This is reinforced by the way that demanding someone apologize to a third person is also part of the available toolset. The underlying idea is that the activity of apologizing is, in some way, everyone's business. It looks to me like the degree to which third parties are involved varies. It's very low for minor inconveniences, but higher when more substantial damage is involved. I've mentioned being obliged to apologize, but there is another obligation in play, which I also kind of hinted at before. It is often unacceptable to reject an apology, making the accepting of apologies as formalistic as the making of them. If A has to apologize to B, and B has to accept the apology, both are a mere ritual, always in danger of losing meaning to the participants, emotional meaning. I would suggest this indicates that apologies have their core not so much in one-to-one relationships, but in wider social nets. Look at it like this. Since we're talking about something that's culturally old, the origin context is likely the kind of tightly knit, close quarters community typical of a pre industrial village, which is what most of our ancestors lived in for millennia. A degree of non disruption, of outward peace, was essential for success and even survival. You always had to deal with the same people the next day, and you probably had little choice in who you dealt with. So if there was a quarrel, there had to be ways to put it behind you, not for mental health reasons, not for peace of mind or for ethical considerations, but because the community needed you to. Making quarreler A apologize to quarreler B and making quarreler B accept that apology did nothing for A or B necessarily, and did nothing to actually resolve whatever problem they may have had, but it made outward peace and maintained group cohesion. We load the ritual of apology with justice and morality, but it has little to do with them. It's equipped to keep groups together in a rough and ready way, where individual interests are submerged by communal interest. When we're no longer living in a community depending on strong cooperation for everyday survival, in a context where we get to choose our social context far more, this ritual loses a lot of its legitimacy because it loses a lot of its necessity. From here, we can go back to accepting and obligation. The bar for not accepting apologies is high. Under most circumstances, we expect an accepting response. This can even be enforced. A friend of mine once was pressured to accept an apology, to forgive an abusive partner because of a Christian fundamentalist belief that forgiveness is a conscious decision and a morally charged one. Fortunately, she refused. Understanding a case like this one means understanding what, stripped of the necessitating context, the ritual of apology can become a weapon in the hands of community leaders to enforce traditional hierarchies. Here, that between husband and wife. It has always been that, but it has become more insidious as traditional hierarchies have been challenged. Nothing is more radical than a traditional power structure in its waning era. The point that apologies are meant to serve communities more than individuals, though they can do that too, is reinforced, I think, by looking at neighboring rituals, especially public apologies, which are common in many cultures around the world. They quite obviously address the public as much as the damaged party, restoring order, restoring outward peace. This is where we slide over to the role and meaning of not apologies, but punishment, something I've talked about in another video, but which I will have to revisit at some point. This also sort of explains that even a murderer's apology may hold some power to some people. The attempt to engage in a peacemaking ritual with society at large is taken to show a degree of community mindedness, a readiness to still be part of it despite of what one may have done. In one of the many absurdities about the treatments of wrongdoers, the people who feel some value in the murderer's apology may also think that the murderer still deserves death, deserves in big air quotes. And this is where we get to the next point. The community isn't interested very much in actual results of an apology. At the beginning, I talked about the practical aspects of apologies, what they are actually good for at times. None of them really apply in the case of a really destructive act. Why then do many people still find some value in them? That doesn't seem to be explicable without the idea that the apology as such, all social practical goals and results aside, still does something. It doesn't really right the wrong, but it undoes part of the wrong in a little ephemeral way. There must be, therefore, an abstract community entity writ large, which is hurt by the wrongdoer, but which can be somewhat healed by their apology, even if the murderer still dies, indeed still has to die. Now don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying most people having these feelings actually consciously believe in this abstract entity. Some call this supernatural entity God or some other name like that, but that's not necessarily the case. If you asked people, do you believe in an abstract entity representing your community, they would usually say no. However, overt statements aside, they fully act and, more importantly, instinctively react as if they do believe in that. Thus, we can probably fairly say that they have an unconscious metaphysics concerning community and morality, one that shapes them in a way they're not even aware of. How does such a tacit belief come about? I think it is ultimately based on the lived reality of communities. Unless we work hard on our every opinion, we are often kind of slow and lazy thinkers. We don't fully critically examine most of our beliefs most of the time, even when we have the ability and opportunity to do so. Our attitudes do not jump from point to point digitally. They slowly slide, are shaped by our surroundings, by our doings, by what we hear said, and by what we say ourselves. In the case of apologies, I think our modern post-Enlightenment ideas of justice are an outgrowth of much older, much less examined ideologies. These have mostly to do with maintaining community, and they aren't planned like a building in architecture, but in turn they are the outgrowth of long evolutionary processes. Such processes, in human terms, form habits, not philosophy, since for most of human existence, discarding even an evildoer could be dangerous to the group. It was good to be forgiving, to see the good in someone's willingness to reconcile, even when they had acted quite badly. I think seeing value in the apology of even a murderer is a continuation of a deeply ingrained habit to want to seek ways to make peace in our community. I'm not entirely done with these thoughts, and that's okay, but I think I can offer a tiny conclusion. We will, I think, always need peacemaking rituals, and rituals can't be introduced the way formal institutions can. They are a matter of culture, and therefore it's almost impossible to change them a lot and change them quickly. We can only change them through changing our practice and changing our attitude towards them. So, how do we do that in order to get rid of the absurdities, the metaphysics, the repressive communalism of apologizing, while not getting rid of the positive peacemaking function the ritual can have? This is more a question for a therapist than for a philosopher, but I'll try to at least say one thing. Maybe we should try to say what we actually mean. Don't fall into standard phrasing when there's a problem. If you screwed up, say, "That was my mistake. How can I help make you feel better? How can I help fix this?" Don't apologize if you think you actually did the right thing. That way, the empty ritualism of saying you're sorry is replaced by the chance to actually resolve issues. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for listening. Hope to see you next time. Bye bye.